You know, it's not often that I am so compelled to apologize to someone that I bring them on the show to apologize, but joining me is Kirk Nurmi. You were Jodi Arias' attorney. And I said to you in a phone conversation, I owed you such an apology because the perception of the way that trial was defended was on your shoulders, in my mind and many others, and had talked about it on the air. And then I saw the In Defense Of documentary about your case with Jodi Arais and was so compelled that I wanted to hear your story. So thanks for doing this.
Well, I appreciate that, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here and discuss things with you.
When you were assigned this case, when you knew you were getting this case
Yes.
with Jodi Arais, did you ever expect it was going to turn into the spectacle that it had become?
No, I can't speak for everyone involved, but I don't think any of us did because the spectacle was so large. I mean, when I was handed the file, her name was unknown to me. I guess she had done one CBS 48 Hours special at the time, but it was just another day. The only thing that really stood out to me when I got the Arias file is the fact that we had a female who the state was seeking to execute.
What do you think led to the spectacle? Was it the fact that she was an attractive woman? Was it? There were so many people that had opinions, but this really compelled the country while this was going on. Do you have any idea why this one case was so compelling to people?
I think probably it's going to be a lot of things for a lot of different people, and being in the eye of the hurricane, it's hard for me to really say why people were so attracted to it. But I think one thing is partially the fact that she was a woman, right? Women typically aren't charged with murder, and certainly the death penalty isn't often sought against women. And I think we have, as we saw in other episodes of the In Defense Of, I think we have maybe a fascination with someone like Ted Bundy, who we think is attractive and polite and social. They're not Charles Manson, right? So when they do an aberrant act, I think there's more attention brought to those people as well.
As the trial was beginning and you saw the spectacle start to unfold, how did it affect you then? Were you then surprised at being a part of the story?
Well, yeah, in some ways, yes, but my ultimate goal was, you know, being an opponent of the death penalty, was to keep my client away from the death penalty. So my focus maintained in the courtroom, like all I could control was what happened inside the courtroom as best I could. So working to save her life was my fixation. Now, of course, outside the courtroom, the trial was so all-encompassing. It carried over. I could turn on the TV and on the local news like I might normally do, and there I was. And on the ride home, there was the testimony on the radio and people commenting on it. So on a personal level, it became all-encompassing and something that was hard to escape even then, because especially at the time I was a lot heavier and had a shaved head. I was easily recognizable. So people would approach me as well in public.
When you were in the middle of this, we talk about athletes in sports, that as the playoffs go on, the pressure is what gets to some people. Because of the notoriety, because of the attention, was there added pressure to you, or was it just because it was a death penalty case, it was enough pressure to begin with?
Well, I think the death penalty certainly makes it the ultimate pressure for any lawyer, right? But there was certainly added pressures in terms of external forces. I mean, we talk about social media, getting death threats, things like that. That made my job certainly a lot harder.
And I want to get into the documentary part of this,
Sure.
because I told you my perspective was changed 180 degrees after watching that documentary. But during the trial, do you ever question yourself? I mean, when you're defending someone, does your belief in them, or does what they're accused of, does that affect you, or is your job and you just put on a defense?
My job is my job, and one of the ways that I explain it to people is it's somewhat similar to a surgeon who's at the ER. He doesn't do a background check on the person. He doesn't look at their viewpoints, whether or not they've been a good person. He just does his job. And in a constitutional democracy, if we're going to have a justice system that is the beacon for the world, then everybody, whether we like them or not, deserves a good defense.
So were you second guessed? Because I remember watching, every network was broadcasting this, and everybody had an expert lawyer in there. Did you ever watch some of the criticism of whether it was you or the prosecutor, and some of the criticism, and kind of laugh because they weren't in the courtroom, but they were all the Monday morning quarterbacks?
Well, obviously everybody has their own opinion, but a lot of times what really got me is that the perspective wasn't an informed one. It would be real estate attorneys or other people like that commenting on things, as opposed to experienced capital criminal defense attorneys, and that's where I think some of the coverage failed.
I would like to talk to you about the aftermath,
Sure.
because your story to me, is much more compelling than this trial. I mean, I know the tragedy of the trial and what happened, a murdered man and a woman whose life has changed. But your story to me was so compelling. So I would love to do this, is talk about the documentary and how your life changed after the trial. Kirk's story is an amazing one of how his life was changed by this trial and what happened next. In my perspective, a defense attorney has changed because of your story. So we'll be back with Kirk Nurmi. We're back with Kirk Nurmi, and I want to say, known as Jodi Arais' attorney, which you're an accomplished lawyer. Does that bother you a little bit, being known as, that's kind of what you're known as? Does that bother you?
I think to some degree it has in the past, but now I just understand it's just part of the story, part of my journey in life. And the only correction I always like to make when people say that is former lawyer. I want to make sure that my distance from her is well known. Well,
as Paul Harvey said, with all due respect to him, this is the rest of the story, because I watched the In Defense Of documentary about this case. And to be honest, we all talked about this on the air, and Jodi Arais and what had happened. And everybody assumed it was your defense, that when going after Travis Alexander as the bad guy and almost deserving what he got was your idea for a defense, and that's not the case.
No, ultimately, is when you see in the special, one of our local legal experts, who I do have a lot of respect for, Monica Lindstrom, even talks about how if you don't definitively know as the lawyer that the story is false, you have to let that person get up and testify. And the Sixth Amendment allows her to testify, tell her story, and there's more complexities because it's a death penalty case. But ultimately, the client tells the story, and the client's testimony and story guides the defense. And so that's when she went down to the bottom of the courthouse. She's awaiting sentencing, death or life, and she makes sure to throw myself, and most prominently myself and the rest of the defense team, under the bus, as, you know, not accepting responsibility.
So you had a big choice to make, because it cost you a lot to tell your version of the story and defend yourself, didn't it?
Well, ultimately it did. You know, at the time when she did that, it was 2013, we wound up with a hung jury, and I was still her lawyer. And when it was finally over in April 2015, I had that thought to make, and I was considering whether I wanted to respond to that or not, whether it was worth it. And then what really happened, what really motivated the responses, in August of that year, I was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I made the decision that if I was going to depart this earth, her lies that she told about us creating the defense and that sort of thing and making up this attack on Mr. Alexander, I was not going to let my legacy be tarnished by that, so I defended myself. And I defended myself in what I believe was an ethically permissible way. The bar disagreed. They wanted to sanction me. Rather than accept that sanction, I wanted to move on. I wanted to make a clean break. I felt like if I was going to go through chemotherapy, that I did not want to live my life the same way that I had lived my first 49 years. So when it came down to it, I gleefully asked for disbarment.
And did you ever have a discussion with her about her throwing you under the bus?
There's no need.
Okay. I just didn't know if you'd ever addressed that with her.
Yeah, I don't want to get into my communications, but ultimately, I'm gleefully separated from Miss Arias.
I was so compelled by your story because, again, like I said, it was a 180-degree shift of what my impression was of how that was handled. And I went from wondering how in the world you could sleep at night doing something like that to not being able to sleep at night until I told you how sorry I was for what I said about you on the air. Have you had that? Have people said that to you publicly after seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, some people have certainly reached out and said, hey, my perspective is completely different, and I get a better understanding now. And while the search for external validation isn't really what my life is about, the idea, I want to be able to move forward and teach and inspire, and I want people need to, I think, to have a different view of me, a more accurate view of who I am, because one of the things I say when I talk is, I wasn't really introduced to the world as Kirk Nurmi the person, but a character in a reality show.
Absolutely.
And they never really saw the person. And given my battles with infamy and cancer and everything else, the life changes I've made and the transformation, I really feel called to inspire people to better their own lives. And so part of the reason of doing this show, even though I want to distance myself from Miss Arias, is allowing people to see who I really am and what I can offer to the world.
So let's talk about that. How are you? How is your health? And how is your life now as far as being able to inspire other people? How is that all going?
Well, I have been in remission now for a little over 2 years. I get scans every 6 months. I'll have my final one in January. So my health is good. I'm still kind of dealing with getting my fitness back because chemotherapy can be very damaging to the body, as you might imagine. But you know, now I've got a book coming out in January called Defending Your Greatness, and that's the keynote that I give across the country. And I think people are starting to connect with it because we understand that we have to live our most authentic lives. I've put happiness as a priority in my life instead of some of the other things and some of those capitalistic endeavors,
Sure.
right? And so that's been a real source of joy for me, and I'm leading my life with joy. And I think people are starting to become receptive to the idea that maybe they should open their ears to me and hear what I have to say.
Well, from this day forward, I will address you as Kirk Nurmi, and I will leave the other part of that, even former attorney, off. And I got to tell you, it's been a pleasure meeting you. And thank you for your kindness and the way you received me when I reached out to you. And thanks for the work you're doing now. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Mike, it's a real pleasure.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.
We'll be back.